What if the power that could heal our fractured world has been hidden in plain sight? What if the very essence of creation, the source of wisdom, intuition, and inner alchemy, was suppressed, distorted, and buried under centuries of fear and control? Throughout history, entire civilizations have risen and fallen around the sacred balance of masculine and feminine energy. But somewhere along the path of human evolution, that balance was shattered. The divine feminine, once revered in temples, myths, and mysteries, became a forbidden truth, a whisper in the shadows of forgotten lore. Her name was Isis, Shakti, Sophia, Inanna, the Great Mother. She was not just a goddess, but a cosmic principle, a living intelligence. She wasn't worshipped out of fear or superstition, but because ancient peoples understood. She was the bridge between spirit and matter, heaven and earth, consciousness and form. But as patriarchal systems gained power, this wisdom became dangerous. It was silenced, demonized, rewritten. And in its place grew dogma, hierarchy, and imbalance, a world that glorifies dominance, logic, and control while neglecting the intuitive, the nurturing, the receptive forces that complete us. In this video, we're not just talking about femininity or gender roles. We're diving deep into the primordial energy that flows through all life. You'll discover why the divine feminine was hidden, what secrets she holds, and how reconnecting with this archetypal force can awaken something ancient within you. We'll explore suppressed teachings from mystical traditions, symbols that survived religious purges, and how this lost knowledge is resurfacing in a time of global transformation. Because to remember her, to truly know her, is to begin the alchemical process of healing the inner and outer world. So if you've ever felt that there's something missing in the modern spiritual conversation, if you've sensed that the sacred has been fractured, stay with me. We're about to unveil what was never meant to be forgotten. Long before the rise of organized religion, ancient cultures across the globe honored the divine feminine as central to their spiritual and cosmic understanding. She was not merely an adjunct to the male gods, but the very source of creation itself, an eternal womb from which all life emerges and to which all returns. In pre-dynastic Egypt, long before the reign of the pharaohs, the goddess Ma'at embodied balance, truth, and cosmic order. She wasn't an abstract concept. She was the intelligence of the universe itself, depicted with wings outstretched, guiding the scales of the soul. Similarly, Isis, the great enchantress, was known as the Queen of Heaven, keeper of life and death, and wielder of secret names, the very vibrations that shaped reality. In ancient Mesopotamia, Inanna, goddess of love and war, descended into the underworld, shedding each garment of identity until she stood bare before death. This was no tale of weakness. It was a symbolic map of inner transformation, a ritual descent that echoed through later mystery traditions. The Vedic texts of India speak of Shakti, the primordial feminine force, the dynamic energy behind all manifestation. She is not separate from Shiva, the masculine stillness, but is the movement, the rhythm, the dance of the cosmos. Without Shakti, Shiva is inert. Without the feminine, the masculine has no expression. Even in early Gnostic Christianity, the divine feminine made appearances, not as Mary the meek, but as Sophia, the embodiment of divine wisdom, who fell from the pleroma, the realm of pure spirit, into matter, sparking the story of creation itself. Yet this Sophia was later cast out of canonized doctrine, relegated to apocryphal texts and heretical whispers. So what happened? Why was this reverence systematically erased? The answer lies in power and fear. As patriarchal empires consolidated authority, both spiritual and political, the chaos of the feminine was deemed dangerous. She represented mystery over doctrine, inner knowing over blind obedience, cycles over linear conquest. The feminine was not to be owned or defined, it was to be experienced. And that terrified those who sought control. The sacred temples of the feminine were razed. Priestesses were hunted and branded witches. Symbols once tied to fertility, rebirth, and lunar knowledge were twisted into emblems of sin and temptation. Even the serpent, once a sacred totem of wisdom, transformation, and the Kundalini force, became the villain in the story of Eden. Philosophically, the divine feminine represents the chaos before order, the void before creation, the formless potential from which form emerges. She is the dark womb of the universe, the primordial night, the black Madonna, the yin to the yang. In Taoist philosophy, without the yielding softness of yin, yang becomes brittle, unsustainable. Suppressing this archetype wasn't just a cultural shift, it created a psychic fracture. Humanity began to identify only with action, with domination, with intellect. The intuitive, the emotional, the cyclical, the mysterious, these were exiled to the unconscious, both collectively and individually. And yet, she never left. She appears in dreams, in symbols, in art, in the silent strength of mothers, in the aching pull of the moon, in the rising feminine energy within both men and women as our world begins to remember. This isn't a return to matriarchy, it's a call to restore balance. To understand the divine feminine isn't to worship a new idol, it's to reconnect with half of what it means to be whole. To truly grasp the divine feminine, we must shift from the external to the internal, from worshiping symbols to embodying the essence. She is not confined to temples or goddesses or sacred texts. She lives within us. She is the voice we hear when we're still, the pull toward compassion, the wisdom behind a mother's instinct, the creativity that moves without reason, the knowing that defies logic. The divine feminine is not passive. She is receptive. This is a crucial distinction. In a world obsessed with doing, producing, and achieving, receptivity is seen as weakness. But in ancient esoteric traditions, it was understood as the gateway to power. Receptivity is how we channel. It's how prophets heard divine guidance. It's how artists enter flow. It's how shamans receive visions. The divine feminine teaches us that to surrender is not to give up. It's to tune into a higher frequency, to allow something greater to move through us. But she is also the great transformer. Just as the womb breaks down and rebuilds life, the divine feminine governs death, decay, and rebirth. She is the dark goddess, the archetype feared across all cultures because she forces us to face the parts of ourselves we've buried. The shadow, the grief, the wounds of the soul. This is why so many resist her energy. The divine feminine does not cater to comfort. She demands truth. She strips away illusion. She invites descent, not into suffering, but into depth. The descent into the underworld that Inanna made, the descent that Persephone endured, these are not mere myths. They are blueprints for inner alchemy. Psychologically, this descent is crucial. In Jungian terms, the divine feminine is both the anima, the unconscious feminine within the male psyche, and the archetype of the Great Mother, who can nurture or devour. To ignore her is to risk imbalance. To embrace her is to integrate wholeness. But how do we do that? We start by recognizing her language. She speaks through intuition, not analysis. Through symbol, not instruction. Through sensation, not explanation. A sudden dream that shakes you. A creative urge that won't let go. A moment of empathy that moves you to tears. These are not distractions, they are doorways. The divine feminine also teaches us about cycles. In nature, nothing blooms all the time. There is rhythm, waxing and waning, birth and death, inhale and exhale. Yet in modern society, we are taught to ignore this rhythm. We glorify endless productivity and label rest as laziness. But she whispers the ancient truth, that creation requires incubation, that renewal begins in stillness. Even the elements speak her language. Water, the most feminine of all, teaches us how to flow, how to adapt, how to carve through stone without force. Earth, the Great Mother, reminds us of nourishment, rootedness, and patience. The moon, ever-changing, governs tides, fertility, and the hidden layers of emotion. And yet, we've turned these elements into commodities. We've stripped the feminine from the planet, just as we've stripped it from ourselves. Is it any wonder we now face both a spiritual and ecological crisis? The most tragic illusion of all is that the divine feminine is less than the divine masculine. But in Hermeticism, in Taoism, in alchemy, every tradition that truly understands the cosmos, this duality is sacred and interdependent. The feminine is chaos to the masculine's order, matter to spirit, being to doing. She is not here to replace. She is here to complete. And as you begin to awaken to her presence, don't look for grand signs or cosmic fireworks. Begin with the subtle, the intuitive nudge, the emotional wave, the quiet moment where you allow yourself to feel rather than fix. Because the divine feminine will not shout to be heard. She will wait until you are ready to listen. The divine feminine is not a relic of the past. It is the heartbeat of the present, pulsing beneath the noise of our modern world, waiting to be remembered. And yet, her presence has been carefully edited out of our stories, our scriptures, our systems. This erasure was not accidental. It was strategic. Why? Because to awaken the divine feminine is to awaken personal power, not the kind that dominates, but the kind that liberates. A power rooted in inner knowing, not external control. And such power is dangerous to any system that thrives on submission and silence. In ancient times, she was revered. Across Sumer, Egypt, India, Mesoamerica, and beyond, cultures honored goddesses not just as symbols of fertility, but as cosmic forces of wisdom, justice, destruction, and rebirth. Isis, the all-knowing mother who resurrects life. Shakti, the raw creative force of the universe. Sophia, the embodiment of divine wisdom in Gnostic texts. These were not mythological decorations, they were maps of consciousness. But as patriarchal structures rose, these goddesses were recast, softened, marginalized, or demonized. The serpent, once a symbol of feminine wisdom and kundalini energy, was rebranded as evil. The sacred feminine temples were burned. Priestesses became whores. Wombs became sources of shame. And the divine was rewritten in exclusively male form. The Gnostics, early mystical Christians, spoke of a divine figure called Sophia, a cosmic mother who birthed the material world out of a longing to experience herself. But over time, Sophia was stripped from the mainstream canon, her teachings buried beneath dogma. Why? Because Sophia teaches that divinity lies within, not just above. She invites communion, not obedience, and that threatens hierarchies. Even the story of Eve was altered. In older Gnostic and Sumerian traditions, the feminine figure was not a temptress, but a bringer of knowledge. The fruit of the tree of knowledge was not a sin, it was a spark, a call to awaken from unconsciousness. But in rewriting her as the cause of mankind's fall, the divine feminine was cast as the villain of the human story. Ask yourself, why would a system fear a force that nurtures, feels, creates, and transforms? Because true feminine power can't be controlled. It doesn't conform. It questions. It heals what cannot be monetized. And when women and men reclaim that power, the illusion of separation begins to fall apart. Let's go deeper. In alchemical traditions, every true transformation requires the conjunction of opposites. The alchemist seeks to marry the sun and moon, sulfur and mercury, masculine and feminine. Without this sacred union, there is no gold, no philosopher's stone. This isn't metaphor, it's metaphysics. The process of spiritual alchemy demands the integration of the feminine within us, regardless of gender. Carl Jung understood this. He warned of the danger of repressing the anima, the inner feminine archetype. When denied, it distorts, manifesting as emotional volatility, addiction, or projection. But when embraced, it brings psychic wholeness, emotional intelligence, compassion, creative genius, intuition. You see, the feminine isn't just about being soft or gentle. It is the fire of Kali that burns illusion, the storm of Sekhmet that clears corruption, the void of the Black Madonna that forces rebirth. She is the paradox, creator and destroyer, lover and warrior, womb and tomb. To fear her is to fear our own depths. But this fear is precisely what has kept humanity asleep. When we suppress the feminine, we lose the ability to feel. And when we cannot feel, we cannot connect to each other, to nature, or to the divine. This disconnection leads to numbness. And numbness breeds violence, both internal and external. Restoring the divine feminine is not just a spiritual act, it is a revolutionary one. It demands that we look at the systems we've inherited and ask, Where has the feminine been exiled? In our education? In our religions? In ourselves? To remember her is not simply to learn about ancient goddesses or sacred rites. It is to embody her presence, to walk with more empathy, to create without apology, to trust the unseen, to sit in stillness and know. Because here is the final secret. The divine feminine was never truly lost. She has always been here, hidden in your breath, your tears, your dreams, your silence, waiting not to be worshipped, but to be awakened. The divine feminine isn't a relic of the past or a metaphor reserved for ancient priestesses. It is a living force waiting to be awakened within you. But to do so requires more than understanding. It demands embodiment, a return to a way of being that honors depth, intuition, and sacred presence. To begin, one must first reconnect with intuition. The feminine speaks not in commands, but in whispers, subtle feelings, dreams, and inner knowings that bypass logic and speak directly to the soul. This voice is often drowned out by the noise of the world, so to hear it, you must make space for stillness. Sit in silence each day. Place your hand over your heart and ask not what you think, but what you know without knowing why. This is not irrationality, but the deeper intelligence of the soul reclaiming its voice. Equally essential is the reconsecration of the body. In a world that worships the mind, the feminine teaches that divinity is not found by escaping the physical, but by descending into it. She lives in the rhythm of your breath, the sway of your hips, the warmth of sunlight on your skin. Through sacred movement, dance, or mindful touch, the body becomes a temple, not a vessel to transcend, but one to revere. When you eat, breathe, move, or even rest with awareness, you return to the womb of the sacred within. Creation is another path to awakening this force. The feminine creates not for approval, but because it is her nature to bring forth beauty. To paint, sing, write, or speak from the heart without justification is an act of defiance in a world that values production over presence. When you create without permission, you align with the very essence of the cosmic mother, chaotic, raw, radiant. Emotion, too, is a gateway. Society tells us to suppress our feelings, to be stoic and unmoved, but the divine feminine urges you to feel fully. Grief, rage, ecstasy, and love are all sacred messengers. To cry without shame, to laugh with your whole being, to let emotion move through you like a storm cleansing the earth, this is alchemy. Journaling, ritual bathing, or simply allowing yourself to feel without judgment becomes a spiritual act. Ritual, though often forgotten in modern life, is how the feminine anchors herself in the mundane. You don't need an ornate temple, just a moment of reverence. Lighting a candle with intention, whispering gratitude over your food, sitting beneath the moon in quiet communion. These simple acts restore a sense of the sacred to the everyday. An altar with objects that speak to your soul, stones, feathers, flowers, sacred texts, becomes a mirror of your inner world, a place where your spirit and the divine meet. As you awaken the feminine, it becomes clear that this path is not about opposing the masculine, but healing and balancing it. Within each of us is a wounded masculine energy, rigid, controlling, disconnected. When softened by the feminine, this energy transforms. Action flows from stillness. Logic dances with intuition. Strength bows to compassion. In this sacred union, we become whole. Community, too, is vital. The feminine thrives not in isolation, but in connection. Seek out those who value truth, vulnerability, and shared growth. Whether through spiritual circles or intimate friendships, surrounding yourself with those who honor the sacred will deepen your own remembrance. And finally, perhaps the greatest teacher of the divine feminine is the earth herself. Her cycles, her storms, her silence, all mirror your own. Walk barefoot on the soil. Listen to the wind. Speak your fears to the river. Nature is not separate from you. She is you. To honor her is to honor the divine mother within. The forbidden truth is this: when you remember the feminine, you do more than reclaim an archetype. You resurrect a way of being the world has tried to forget. And in doing so, you heal not only yourself, but the collective wound of separation. You become a vessel of remembrance, a bridge between worlds. a living altar through which the sacred breathes again. What if the suppression of the divine feminine was never just a historical error, but a calculated forgetting? What if her power was buried not because it was false, but because it was too real, too liberating, too uncontainable, too much like the raw, untamed truth of life itself? Throughout the ages, the feminine has been demonized, romanticized, distorted, and dismembered. But she has never disappeared. She lives in symbols, in stories, in the silences between sacred words. She waits in dreams and shadows and longings we can't quite name. And now, perhaps more than ever, she rises. To awaken the divine feminine is to remember what the world has begged you to forget. That your body is sacred, your feelings are valid, your intuition is wisdom, and your presence is enough. You are not here to be endlessly productive, perfectly polished, or spiritually superior. You are here to be whole, to feel, to create, to connect, to remember. And so, the path forward is not about becoming something new. It is about peeling away the layers that told you were anything less than sacred. It is about reclaiming the parts of yourself that were shamed, silenced, or denied. It is about standing in the center of your own being and saying, I remember who I am. As you leave this video, I invite you to reflect deeply, not just on what was said, but on what was stirred within you. What ancient knowing rose from beneath the surface? What truth whispered in the quiet spaces between the words? If this message resonated, share it. Let this remembrance ripple outward. Subscribe, leave a comment, or offer your own insight, because when we speak the truth aloud, we give others permission to remember theirs. The divine feminine is no longer hidden. She is here, in you, around you, rising with every breath. The only question that remains is, will you answer her call?